Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Judaism Without Apologizing. Today, I am standing in front of Congregation Ahavas Israel in Passaic, New Jersey, a major shul for the thousands of people that live here, and also the spiritual home of Rabbi Ron Yitzchak Eisenman. You might know Rabbi Eisenman as the rabbi who transformed the shul from one that is only, a daily minyan to a shul that has over 40 minyanim a day, or perhaps you read his Mishpacha column or his books, The Elephant in the Room, or For Everything a Time, or A Shul with a View. Rabbi Eisenman has been a leading rabbinic figure in the Jewish world for many years and is often the clearest voice on major hashkafic issues. And today, we had an amazing conversation focusing on the 3 weeks, and we talked about Ahavas Israel and Sinas Chinum. We also discussed Muna and Bitachon, and we talked about the role of a shul in people's lives, amongst many other things. And it was a great conversation, and I think you'll appreciate how Rabbi Eisenman's close to 3 decades of experience really shines forth in everything he says. So whether you're part of Ahavas Israel or a reader of Mishpacha or someone searching for spiritual bravery, you are in for a powerful conversation, no fluff, just Torah truth and some good old-fashioned common sense. So let's get right to it. This is Judaism Without Apologizing.
In a world where everyone seems to have not just a microphone, but a megaphone, the voices of our Gedolim, our Rabbanim and Rashi Yeshiva far too often seem to get lost in the noise. This podcast is here to change that. I'm your host, Hillel Eisenberg. Join me as we sit down with our nation's leaders as they address the hashkafic challenges that matter most, without the fluff and without the drama, with truth that doesn't flinch. Buckle up, because this isn't your typical podcast. This is Judaism Without Apologizing.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Eisenman, for coming on the Judaism Without Apologizing podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Reb Hill.
Yes. So you have been a leading rabbi for many decades at this point. You've been at the forefront of the North American rabbinic world. And I think you have a pulse of the people. And I want to dive right in with the following. Right now, it's the 3 weeks. And I think for a lot of people, it's a little bit difficult because you know that there's something we should be feeling and doing. And yet it's hard enough to have a meaningful life as a Jew, juggling work and kids and Torah and Tefillah. And now on top of it, I have to muster up the emotional energy of the Churban Abayis, which I really have nothing to do with. I don't know that much about. What piece of advice can you give to normal, regular working people to make the 3 weeks a little bit more authentic and real and connect to something that happened thousands of years ago?
I mean, number one, a little bit, I question the premise that I'm one of the leading North American rabbis. I think we should make clear from the beginning, I don't represent anyone except myself. I'm not any sort of organizational rabbinic advisor for anything. And whatever it is, the views of myself and myself alone. So I just want to be clear about that. If you look in the writings of the great Bali Musa, you look in Das Torah of Rabbi Rucham Levovitz and the printed writings of the Alter of Kelm. It's amazing how many shmuzin there are on the topic of Noisei Volim Chaveri, to feel another person's pain. Rabbi Rucham has many pieces, a lot of the ideas being stressed and re-stressed, and so too the Alter of Kelm. So apparently, again, I didn't make a scientific study, but it seems that I would imagine something like perhaps 30% of the shmuz in there are circle back to somehow Nosei Bolim Chavero. So the fact that it exists an awful lot, besides emphasizing how critical it is, I don't think it's wrong to extrapolate that it's also a problem, meaning getting to that level. If you when you walked into my shul before, there was a big sign, "The coffee cup stops here." Reason for that, people started to bring, not in learning time is one thing, but in davening, when people are davening, I noticed people started to bring coffee cups in. So that's not our discussion, but if there's a sign that says no coffee in the shul, that means that there was an issue that people were bringing coffee in the shul. If there's a sign no talking in shul, probably there were people who were talking in shul. Imagine in Beis Medrash Kavod, it doesn't have to be a sign, no, Ein L'daber B'Shas HaTfilah. So too, when we see that Rabbi Yerucham and the great Bali Musa stressed this time and time again, they must have felt that it's a difficult task. And that's also a lesson to recognize that it's a difficult task. Besides what you mentioned, the time lapse from the Korban to now, but honestly, and it makes minimal difference whether you're up on all the news and whether you have a smartphone or don't have a smartphone. You watch clips which are coming out. You don't watch clips. But reality is that in our time, I mean, we get just an example which was certainly horrific, but it didn't really impact on the Jewish community. It certainly was something as human beings we feel with the floods in Texas. I'm just it was an unbelievable, horrific tragedy. I mean, young, innocent, the girls of the camp there were literally washed away. But besides the tragedy, when you hear that, and then the next day there hears about this conflict in the war and in any war, leaving out Eretz Israel now. So unfortunately, we're flooded often with, the worst news, which unfortunately can cause a person to be a little numb. So one thing, honestly, I think Chazal in their great wisdom, I think they anticipated that. One way is, like the Sefer Chinuch says, the chitzonius is always pole on the pneumius. Outer actions can impact on the inner actions. The Yiddish phrase, with the eating comes the appetite. So it works, but maybe in Midos as well. Chazal, the idea of not listening to, music or orchestrated music, not shaving, not getting haircuts. That's at least a start. And then we get to the 9 days and no eating meat. There's laundry. These things do impact on mostly all our lives, to a certain extent. So that's one. Two, perhaps one is to recognize there is a challenge. That's, I think, number one is recognize there is a challenge. Number two would be to, sometimes we look for heterim. I'm not saying heter, obviously, sometimes it is a necessity. But, b'shas hatrach, b'diavad kilachatchila dabi. If it's a difficult situation, so even that which is usually just number two can be moved to the list in number one priority. But it's sometimes read, but nevertheless, it's a struggle that a person has, and we should focus on what Chazal said. Besides that, I think that, if you bring it closer to home, I think it'll make a greater impact. It's if you know the story of someone who, look, we know one step more back, the Brisker Rav, when he asked, should they make a separate commemoration, Yom Avelos, a day of mourning for the Holocaust, and believe that it's recorded in writing in a number of places. I think, frankly, it's in the Art Scroll keynotes for Tisha. I think you'll find it there in one of the keynotes. I think perhaps when they have the keynotes in the Art Scroll keynotes for the Churban Europa, for the Holocaust, so they bring down that the Brisker Rav was asked, and the Brisker Rav answered that everything is a continuation, is a straight line from the Churban Abayis. I mean, the Gullus which followed, and therefore all the subsequent Jewish tragedies, obviously the Inquisition, the Chmielnicki pogrom, and the pogroms in Europe, and of course, unfortunately, climaxing in the Holocaust, and even in our time, the horrific massacre which occurred on October 7th, 2023. We have to realize that's all connected. That's all one large Jewish tragedy. And in that way, unfortunately, Hillel, I think, how can you not be connected? And there's so many real live stories that we can access today of people. If you look at it as one contiguous Churban, so by hearing somebody who survived the October 7th, by recognizing the pain of the Bibas family, the man who lost his wife, his two children, honestly, how can you not feel pain? How can you not feel pain?
So let me zone in on that. Is majority of the yearning of the Beis HaMikdash because of our physical pain? Meaning, for example, Shlomo HaMelech and the times of the Bayis Rishon, they were also yearning for Mashiach, but they had as close to utopia as could be. They had the Beis HaMikdash. They had, I think, world peace. and yet they were still yearning for Mashiach to come. Is there an aspect of yearning for Mashiach and the ultimate redemption, nothing to do with pain and destruction, but simply for Hashem's glory to come upon us once again? And is that completely abstract and reserved for the Mekubalim, or regular normal people could also attain that level where, in addition to all the pain and suffering, I am yearning for Mashiach, not just because of the pain and suffering and because my uncle has cancer and because somebody had 6 miscarriages and all that's going to come to an end when the Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. In addition to all that, Hashem's glory is going to reign once again. Is that attainable to regular normal people, or am I even right in that's part of the yearning?
I don't think you're wrong that that's part of the yearning. I also think each person can achieve some sort of can achieve that yearning, that additional yearning, as you said, not just to have bring the Beis HaMikdash, but also to have that Gilui Shechina, whatever you want, that relationship that Mashiach hopefully will bring about. And for instance, as the Chazon Ish points out in Emunah B'Tachon, that when we're dealing with those aspects of Yiddishkeit which are not quantifiable in halachic terms, meaning how much matzah I should eat. If you ate a kazayas, you fulfilled the requirement. If you eat less than a kazayas, you didn't fulfill the requirement. Whatever, did you do part of the mitzvah? Whatever. But if the lulav has to be a certain size, if it's not that minimal size, it's not a lulav. It's a disqualified, a pasa lulav. But with regard to hergeshim, or those aspects of Judaism that involve midos, or whatever, how we want, what we want to characterize it. For instance, bitachon, which is that's what the Chazon Ish is referencing there in Emunah Bitachon. He says, Bali Emunah, a person who's a Baal Bitachon of Ktsas, Gamken Nichlal is a Baal Bitachon. I mean, a person, even if he has minimal, it's not, one person could have a higher, we all have a body temperature, but, that doesn't mean we're sick, if it goes above a certain level. So we all can feel it, but I don't think it's necessarily relegated just to some elite spiritual few. But I just want to take a little bit back for a moment. It's interesting that you mentioned this, because it always hits me very, very, very strongly on Tisha B'Av. Whoever it was, maybe it was whoever we consider instituted the idea of kinos. Obviously, we have kinos in there by people of different times. I mean, the people who wrote the kinos, we have, Mitzeisi, Yerushalayim, which has to do with the Inquisition. Obviously, these people lived later in historical time. But nevertheless, if you look at the kinos, which is the accepted liturgy that's accepted all over to be recited on Tisha B'Av, there's nothing in the kinos almost at all, except some what we call psukei nechama, psukim of consolation. There's nothing in the kinos itself that talks about, except as the consolation of the building of having this messianic era, having some sort of Mashiach, in a general way. But the 90% more, perhaps, of the words of the kinos are one thing and one thing only: to recall the pain. I think we're jumping ahead of ourselves. When we're looking, of course, we all honestly, what you're more talking about is more reflective, I think, in the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, the idea is not Yom Hadin, which is reflected there. It's the idea of Malchus, that Hashem's Malchus should return. So that's something we always should want. That Simlacha kol olam kulo b'chvodecha, you should rule over the whole world in your honor, and simultaneously that should be part. But I'm not sure that yearning for that messianic era. I mean, honestly, what you quoted, ostensibly there was no Tisha B'Av, obviously, in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. So, and even during the second Beis HaMikdash, I imagine that whatever Tisha B'Av wasn't the way wasn't a fast day, I would imagine. So, I think the 3 weeks, the Tisha B'Av is not we want Mashiach, but I'm not sure that the focus is a messianic focus more than any other time of the year.
So here's another question for you. What is your take on modern day acapella music? Because much of it sounds pretty much like music. Do you think that's a problem? Should people refrain from that? Is it usher to listen to it? Is there a litmus test, a line in the sand where I say, okay, this sounds so close to music that it's defeating the whole purpose? Or is it also a reflection of a culture where we're just checking boxes, so it's like, it's technically not music, so therefore it's fine. You know what I mean? What would you say on that?
It's an interesting question. I appreciate that question. First, I want to state clearly for anyone who listens is that I'm not here to paskin halacha. Every shaila that a person has, they should consult their competent rav. And as far as halacha l'maisa, practical halacha, I want to be clear that that's not the purpose of our discussion, and no one should quote it in the way that when I'm paskening, I'm deciding a halachic issue. Rather, we could discuss the parameters and as related, but the specific question has to be asked to a specific rav for whatever the reason. But nevertheless, the acapella music, I think it has to be divided into two areas. You mentioned, it sounds just like it, but I've checked off the box. So there is an aspect in Judaism, certainly in halacha, of quantifying of the parameters of the mitzvah. I know that there are many people here in our shul who grew up in Reform synagogues, and they told me how one of them, not all, I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with the practices, but that growing up in this Reform temple, that when they blew shofar, they actually brought trumpets as well. So more of some sort of orchestration of trumpets with shofars, et cetera, and there was few shofarim together, and it was more of a, not going through the, the issue of Trei Kalil Mushtami, you're hearing whatever you're hearing, but I think we realized that even if their hearts were in the right place, it could be that, they're not fulfilling the mitzvah of shofar. And frankly, to be honest, we both know that, the idea that if it, I don't mean this to be facetious, I really don't, but the idea that you're sort of saying if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it sounds like a duck, it must be a duck. That's not always true. I mean, honestly, let's leave something as maybe more not as timely anymore as playing acapella music, but the idea you go to any wedding anywhere from Williamsburg to Lakewood to wherever, and at the end of the wedding there'll be coffee and quote unquote milk. But I mean, there's something white there, which is liquid white, and it seems to do the exact same job to the coffee. So you'll be able to ride back from Lakewood to Brooklyn as the coffee you had in the morning with your, with your milk, which that you took out of the fridge. So, but we know that it's not milk. So you see that it looks like milk, more or less tastes like milk. I mean, exactly, but it does enough close, and it does the job of milk. I mean, whatever we call coffee creamer, it does the job. But we all do it. After we had meat or this. So technically, I do want to say again, we're not doing halacha l'maisa, but certainly from a just checking the boxes, I don't want to belittle that into saying, like I say, there are times things can look in one way, but the reason is because Chazal didn't want you obviously to have milk. If you're not having milk, it's okay. So now we have to transfer it to the music part. So if you're right, if the reason we don't listen to music, if that is the reason that we shouldn't get I don't know, I don't want to get too far afield, but let's be clear. I think it's important that, the Gemara Tainis, which discusses the halachas, and even in Moed Katan, which halachas hilchas avails in the third parak, I don't believe there it ever says explicitly that there's some sort of a prohibition of listening to music. I don't believe anywhere that the Gemara or the Rishonim spoke directly. Now, again, there are much better people, no sources I'd love to hear. But I believe it's only a 20th, the only idea of recorded music, which really we're dealing with, is only a 20th century phenomenon. There was no such thing. I don't know when records first came out. I mean, nobody's talking about going to a concert, which even I believe, if I'm correct, the idea of music was extrapolated from the prohibition of getting married. And since marriage, which usually had some musical accompaniment, and the reason we don't get married is because it generates a sense of simcha, and perhaps the greatest generator of simcha, or one of the major facilitators of simcha, was the musical accompaniment, the orchestrated accompaniment. So therefore, there was an extension on when music became a listening in and of itself. It became prohibited. I don't know in the Rishonim's time, I don't know if Rav Yosef Karo in his time ever heard of listening to music. It's very possible music was relegated specifically and exclusively to occasions such as a wedding or what have you. But I'm not sure it existed in an independence. I think it's important to recognize that not in the halakhic scheme of things. I think it's a fairly new question of the last 100 or 200 years, meaning what do we do with recorded music? How do we relate, first of all, music outside a wedding, and then second of all, removed recorded music, and then third of all, how do we relate now to quote unquote music, which is not accompanied by. So again, I'm not sure, and I don't know if we want to go down that road, but I'm not sure, Hillel, if the fact that it feels like music, it sounds like music, I can't tell the difference between it and orchestration. Well, maybe the conclusion to be drawn is that, therefore, recorded orchestrated music is also permitted. I'm not sure why, you're going with a premise that listening to recorded music, which has some sort of background-based instrumental background, is definitely prohibited. I'm not 100% sure, that
Even that should be mutter?
No, I'm not talking about what's not mutter. I'm not talking about what's usher. I'm saying that, look, now we'll go back to me personally. You're Baruch Hashem, I get a lot of calls every day coming in right now as we speak, but there are many people which had something, I think it's important to recognize this, something that before the last 40 years was impossible to imagine to a certain extent. And that is the idea of being constantly, the ability to be constantly part of music, and music becomes part of a lot of people's daily lives. I'm not dealing with the community, but I'm thinking individuals. I get a lot of calls from people who are suffering or struggling with mental health issues, that music is an important part of their repertoire. And if we're going to necessarily take a stand that, even acapella music is, that's 100% music. There are a lot of people out there who I would even call it therapeutic. Music becomes a therapeutic part of our lives. And I just think it's more of an exploration, the idea of listening to music in the privacy of your home or in the privacy of your car. I just want to tell you anecdotally, Hillel, I remember somebody came to me and they had to drive to the mountains, which is not uncommon this part of the year. And they had 2 or 3 jobs. So they said, I ended up listening to talk radio on the whole way up and down because the Shia would put me to sleep in Jewish music. I wasn't allowed. So is that really what bring you closer to Hashem, listening to whatever, right wing, left wing, middle wing, political, silly people calling up and making all types of outrageous claims and, at these talk shows? It's hard to believe that's the proper.
So let's say, because the poskim do discuss if somebody's exercising or for kids, but let's say a regular guy, he's not struggling with mental health. He wants to be a good Erlich Yid, but he sees Acapella comes on, Acapella is there. He doesn't have to listen to it. It's enjoyable. And there's multiple albums he could choose. And some are really, really, really basically identical to music, and some are not. Some are just like, vocals. Should one strive to stick with the ones that are, I wouldn't call it less quality, but, more noticeably a cappella, or they're all good. Like you said, if it's not real milk, even though it looks like milk, it's fine.
I think you're correct. And again, I want to stress again that this is not a discussion which is going to have halacha l'maisa, which is not, your halacha questions answered on, it's not a call in line before Pesach, have your questions answered by an Orthodox. That's not what I'm doing. And every question has to be asked to a competent child, to a competent Rav. However, since you frame the question in that framework, if they have 10 pieces of music to listen, and whatever, should they strive to the ones that are acapella over ones that have instrument background or accompaniment?
No, they don't have, but it sounds like they have.
It would probably, look, I would imagine, since, like you said correctly, those who deal with the halacha l'maisa, the minutia of halacha, do, again, I haven't recently made a survey of the contemporary poskim, each one what they hold about a cappella versus that. However, if one does do that and recognize there are competent, well-recognized poskim who are strict machmir in this regard, so yeah, always a person, should try to fulfill, Yotzei holidays, try to cover all their halachic bases. And if you can cover 4, why cover 3? For sure.
Okay, so let me zone in on this. The Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinum, famously, or one of the reasons. What is Sinas Chinum? Because it could sometimes, I feel like, be used as a club to just, hit whatever something somebody doesn't like. It's Sinas Chinum. Is there a definition of what Sinas Chinum is and what Ahavas Israel is? Can you lend some thought onto that?
Well, my observation is, and I include myself in this observation, that Sinas Chinum is almost always that which is perpetrated by my adversary and never what is perpetrated by myself. That's number one. Sinas Chinum is almost always used as an accusatory finger against my adversary. That's always the case. That's what Sinas Chinum is. Others are always guilty of Sinas Chinum. It's very rare that somebody would get up, be it to themselves or be it a rabbi in the shul or a yeshiva in a yeshiva, who would get up and just announce that I think we've all been guilty of Sinas Chinum. We, because we did A, B, and C, we acted in this way towards A, B, C, so this other people, this community, these people. And I'm not saying it not tongue-in-cheek, but obviously I'm not answering your question. But what I do think is hopefully insightful in that comment is that first thing is, let's look at ourselves. Let's try to define Sinas Chinum for ourselves. How can I be better? How can I be better? So exactly what Sinas Chinum is, of course, we know that the Chofetz Chaim focused a lot on Lashon Hara, etc. Look, I believe the Sinas Chinum is when, I would hope, when the sinner becomes, well, I think it can mean many things. I don't think it's a broad enough term to have, I think, a lot of inclusions. But one thing in particular, which I think is very common, is confusing an issue with the person. Meaning, when perhaps the Sinas Chinum is when I actually have hatred, sinna, we'll use Chazal's word, sinna, for someone, for their position, when that position hopefully is not crossing a red line. What I mean to say, obviously, if somebody's threatening physically you, yourself, your family, that already, I can't just separate the person from their threat. The person and the threat are one. But let's just say, for instance, the following. Let's just say, we'll take let's just take this issue that you mentioned before. It's a nice segue. I'm a rabbi that I believe, I'm not necessarily saying I am, it's hypothetical. I'm a rabbi who believes has gone through the sugya very well, which I haven't, but someone has gone through the issue well, and they come to the conclusion that acapella music is prohibited. Acapella music is just, if those who don't want to listen to any music during the 3 weeks should also not listen to acapella. Should go 3 weeks, no music. However, my neighbor, who's also a very prominent rabbi, maybe he's Machavrusa, and he did the same research, and he came to the conclusion just the opposite, that acapella music, quote unquote, checks the halachic boxes, and therefore it's not music. No rabbinic sources ever included that in prohibition of mishnifnes of mematin b'simcho, or with the idea of 3 weeks. So hopefully in that debate, if I start to put him down, if people got telling me, what do you think of Rabbi so-and-so? I say, he's a terrible human being. I hate him. I start not talking to him. That's horrific, meaning, or everything he represents, his shul is I can disagree with him respectfully. It doesn't have to become personal. So often, things that go on in life, we look at them as personal. And that's what I guess the idea of Sinas Chinum, meaning it's free. Free meaning it's sinna, which, doesn't have to be. And I think if you think about it, expresses itself in so many things. So many things. We don't down the chavtzchus. We believe this person did this intentionally. They didn't do it intentionally. We don't know, why they were late, why they missed something, whatever it was. So I think the Sinas Chinum too often is, mentioned the Orthodox world, too often, someone will call me and they'll say, could you hold from this rabbi or not? Now, if they're calling me about, let's say, a certain hashgacha, and I believe that hashgacha generally has deficiencies, okay, I guess it's proper for me to say I personally would not rely on that hashgacha. That's one thing. But it's another thing if, let's say, that I know there's a rabbi who, let's just say, offhand I don't, but if I knew a rabbi who would say acapella music is totally permitted, or acapella music is totally prohibited, and because of that stance, which it becomes that I don't hold from the whole person. There's someone I don't hold from. These are groups I don't. I mean, you hear it broad stroking people and broad stroking individuals and groups, I think, is a big problem.
So what's the balance between being passionate about your Messiah, your Hashkafa, your Mahalach, and your Avodas Hashem, and not getting into sort of cultural to territorial haughtiness? Meaning, have we done a good job in our society of being very proud to be Hasidish or Lubavitch or YU or Yeshivish or Sephardi? So my question is, what would you say is a good way to balance sort of pride in your Messiah and your Hashkafa and what you stand for, and not let that pride become territorial, cultural haughtiness? Meaning, have we done a good job in our society where I could be a proud Chassid or Litvak or Sephardi or Lubavitcher or YU guy, but also respect other people? Or has it come too territorial? Meaning, there's got to be a balance. What would you say is the best way to strike that balance?
It's a very good question. I mean, to a certain extent, almost by definition, let's just say we live in Lakewood, correct? I buy a house next door to you. And being in a community like Lakewood, I'm sure there are multiple options for me to choose to be in my makom tefillah, my main place to daven. So you choose Shtibel Y, and I choose Shul X. I choose base measures Y, you choose whatever more of this minion that for whatever reason it meets here. Now, if it's one thing, if it's just where I daven, but if I become part of that kehillah, to a certain extent, it's natural for me, and it's not a bad thing, it could be a very good thing, me to think we're the best shul in town. I mean, a person should take pride in their shul, should take pride in their chassid of X. So they should. We're proud, good, we're loyal chassidim, we're good chassidim. I'm a Talmud of Rosh Yeshiva Y. The person should be proud of their Rosh Yeshiva. And part of that is to feel a certain sense of good. You mentioned the balance. So the issue is to recognize, I don't want to, I think you're asking a very hard thing because, frankly, when we look at our Rebbe or look at our spiritual leaders, I think there is an element to think, this is the Rebbe. It's hard to get to that balance. But if I can give a crude example, forgive me if the analogy is incorrect, but if I give a crude example, but sometimes you're going out to eat as the family, so okay, the family should decide which restaurant we'll be comfortable at. Let's just say you're at a workplace, and there's one person, there are numerous places people can eat at during lunch. Some go fleishik, some go milchik, some go parav, some go snack, some go full meal. You don't think that, since I had fleishik, I'm superior to you. Since I went to eat pizza, I'm better. I went to eat falafel, I'm better. I mean, you understand it's better for you at that time. It's better for you, that base to satisfy your needs. I think we should look at that, honestly, in our groups as well. Meaning, if I'm part of Hasidus Y, I should recognize that there's parts of Hasidus Y which speak to me. And therefore, but I understand, just like there are people like Milchiks and some people like Fleischik, So Hasidus Z speaks very well to those people who, resonate. It resonates by them. They have more of a particular penchant for that Hasidus. I think that's one way of recognizing that there are Shiva Panim like to get to Torah. But the Gemara says that one of the reasons you're allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael is to learn by a certain Rebbe. So the Gemara says, I've been in there an issue of learning by a certain Rebbe. And you can get a new Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael. And then I chaser Rebbeim in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara answers, Lo mina kol adam zeicha lilmod. Not everybody hits it off with the same Rebbe. So if we would take that lesson to life, that Gemara, that would be wonderful. Meaning, I love my Rebbe, I love my Rosh Yeshiva, I love my, this mentor I've chose for myself. But I recognize the fact that other Rebbeim who speak in a different tone or a different style, or one stresses halacha, one stresses medrash, one chassidus stresses this, one stresses that. So I can respect that different people. That's a good thing, because the Rambam writes at the beginning of Hilchos Deis, Kamosha Partzufeim Shonos, Kach Deoseim Shonos. So no human faces are identical. No human personalities are identical either.
So do you think that there's a point where too much inclusivity it could be harmful, where we are saying to a particular group or style or mahalach that, listen, everyone's got their style, but it's sort of a group that's promoting very lukewarm Yiddishkeit, and it might even be detrimental. It's taking people and slowly removing them away from serious, hardcore, rolling up your sleeves avodas Hashem. Is there ever a point where we have to tell our children that, no, I don't appreciate you, I don't think we should go there, or there's no, like you said, Shiva Panim L'Torah?
It's also a very good question, a difficult question. It depends actually on the age and the personality of the child. Obviously, although I said, if you noticed, and I mentioned that the person should be proud of their Rebbeim, their Chassidus, their Derech, their Hashkafa. I think that's important. We all know, whatever it is, let's just take in the Chassidic world, there's Bel, Satmar, there's Lubavitch, there's Ger, there's Stolin, all types of different Chassidus. I don't think anybody advocates you should tell your child, if it's Monday, we're Bells. If it's Tuesday, we're Satmar. If it's Wednesday, we're Lubavitch. If it's Friday, if it's Thursday, we're Ger. Friday is for Stalin. It's ridiculous, obviously. And then, and then Shabbos, we're BMG. And Sunday, we're more Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak, more YU. It may be ridiculous. I think you just create a confused child, and you're from a confused parent. So I think it's beautiful if I believe in something, you believe in a certain Rebbe, you'd want to convey what you found meaningful, what you found so helpful, what you found so beneficial in your life. You want to convey that to your children. No different than if you and your wife have decided that a protein-rich diet is beneficial to your health, and a low-carb diet is also beneficial to health. Now, it doesn't mean you put down the neighbor for often eating many carbohydrate carbs in their diet, and it doesn't make you feel bad. You don't have to put down the neighbor because they give more Shabbos snacks, sugary snacks that you and your wife don't approve of. You don't have, but you would like to instill in your children the same beneficial feeling that you feel that eating in that certain way has given you and your wife. Well, spiritually, if you've received a benefit from a certain person, from a certain Rebbe, from a certain Rosh Yeshiva, certain spiritual person, well, you would want to instill that into your children. And since that's the foods so yeah, I think it's part of our parental obligations and privileges. However, I think there also has to be a recognition that when the child turns 18, 19, 20, whatever that is, I think there has to be a recognition that none of us are clones of our parents. None of us are clones of our parents. Whatever, this person's father was this way, this person's mother was this way, people certainly have to find their own niche. Sometimes it's very similar to the parents, sometimes it's not. I think as long as, now you mentioned, is there a group to be discouraged? I'm not going to rule out there might be. If I happen to believe, I don't want to mention names, But I think we're aware of that there's a certain Jewish group which we refer to as a cult, which is located in various places in Canada, South America, very Central America. Many, many greater people than me have spoken publicly that this group is not within the big tent. A lot, and I'm saying it very euphemistically. They're not benefiting. They're totally have corrupted anything Jewish. So that obviously, and to be honest, I don't have to go that radical. I do believe that if you were raised, let's say in whatever, a certain Hasidic, certain Rosh Yeshiva, so yeah, there's nothing wrong with explaining at one point to the child maybe why you think this resonated by you. And I guess you could say why there are concerns with the other movement, which I had and you may have as well, but it should be done without if the group is in the big tent. I mean, let's just say, for instance, I really try to move away from names. But let's say the group is officially Orthodox, but their interpretation of Orthodoxy is whatever it is. I want to be clear. I want to be very clear. It can be both to the left and to the right. I mean to say that a person can believe there are certain elements of Orthodoxy which are more lenient, let's say, or have with regard to a Torah-only approach. They believe that a person should embrace secular studies, perhaps even on a higher level. So a person is allowed to explain to their child why they believe that approach may not bring them the most benefit. If the child, after researching the issue, still feels that this place is better for them, so then sometimes a parent should recognize the child has an independent view and they perhaps should respect that. But growing up, there's nothing to say. Just like, for instance, there are certain groups on the quote-unquote right, which may daven at 10:30 in the morning or 11 in the morning, start Shachar is very late. This Hasidah starts davening on Shabbos very late, after the Zman of Kriya Shema, after the Zman of Tefillah. The father was brought up to be very careful in Zmanei Tefillah. There's nothing wrong with telling the child, I prefer you wouldn't daven there because according to even halachically, they're not necessarily fulfilling lechatchila, the mitzvah of Kriya Shema in Berchosea, the mitzvah of Kriya Shema and its brachas in the proper time frame. But again, if later on in life the child would feel a sense of gravitation towards that chassidus, whatever it would be, perhaps the child, then there has to be, I think, a recognition that the child has independence and perhaps respect that view.
So let me go to the opposite extreme. Instead of territorial boundaries that have perhaps gone too far or that balance, what would you say to a lot of people that they don't have one central shul? They daven here and there and there. There's no major rabbinic figure in their life. Their 10th grade Rebbe that they used to be close with, they're now 45 years old, and they don't have any particular thing to be proud or to plant their flag. Is that a good thing? What would you say to somebody who he wished he had a Rebbe or a Rav who's watching out intimately, or a Rosh Yeshiva or someone? He just doesn't have it, and therefore he sort of floats. What would you say to such a person?
So we'll start off by saying I believe Victor Miller is in his famous 10 Commandments of Marriage shiur tape. My time was a cassette tape. I think it's 636 or something like that, that famous tape. He says when you get married, you should have a Rav. The Rav that'll, like you said, a Rebbe could be too, but a person should always have someone in their life that if the husband is acting improperly, the wife should have a proper outlet for her to appeal to. The husband should have someone who, gives them proper guidance. And certainly a Selech HaRav, if it's codified in the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos, certainly is an important part of Judaism to have some sort of spiritual mentor. But I do think here, and I recognize the fact that, others perhaps can disagree, and that's beautiful. But I think the key word rather is balance. And that balance, I think, is shifting per individuals. But there are people here in my shul who communicate with me on a weekly, sometimes daily basis. And that's very good. And there are people who are also excellent Jews here, wonderful Jews, who communicate with me much less frequently. Not every person, if a person has something which requires hadracha, which requires halakhic, then they need obviously a Rav that much closer. However, if a person, I don't think it's theoretically impossible that a person who was brought up with solid parents, halakhically, obviously, if they don't know something, they should ask, they should inquire. But if they're basically they're solid ground, I don't think you have to push everyone that. I have nothing to speak about. Meaning, my wife and I are happy. We're raising our children derech haTorah. We do homework with them. My wife's happy. I'm happy. If you're not sick, why go to a doctor? I'm not sure. Like when you say, like the person you began the story, I think the elephant in the room, or the implication behind the narrative that you so eloquently drew, is that it's almost a negative connotation to begin with. The man is a floater. The man is like, oh, Shachris here. So the picture you're painting already is of a negative character, of a person who seems to be anchorless. I think there are people, obviously the idea of having a makom kavua to daven, that's not necessarily connected with the idea of a selech harav. When I used to live in Washington Heights, there was a minion there, the Aguda. It was actually called the Beis Yosef, but it was in the old Aguda building, I think on 177th Street, 176th Street, and I think Audubon Avenue, if I remember correctly, I'm not even sure. And there was I think the Novominsker Rebbe, Rabbi Perlo Zichrono Livracha, was, I think, the last official Rav there. And there were people who would daven there every day and every Shabbos, every day and every Shabbos. There was no Rav to be had there, but I think the idea of having a kviyas minyan is important. Plus, I think that's important that most lives, most couples, just the challenges and the vicissitudes of parenting, of managing life and parnasa and spiritual needs and all that, balancing that with life. For most people, it would be, I think, beneficial to have a person. I think there's two things. One is the person you described, I think perhaps could be improved by having a set place to daven. I think we all realize having pragmatically, if you have a set place to daven, a minyan that people know to expect you. So where are you today? There's some sort of accountability, but some sort of also appreciation. I think people should have a set minyan. It's a positive thing. Besides that, I think the person without the set minyan could still have a rebbe, and the person who has a set minyan could still not have a rebbe. I think they're two separate issues. Most people, I think, having some sort of spiritual mentor that they check in with or checks in on them even better is beneficial.
Since October 7th, there has been various degrees of responses from kehilos around the world. And is there some hadracha or eitzah or insight you can give to people who they want to feel and feel for the soldiers and the people who are suffering, but they're busy, and the shul that they go to, they say one kapitel tehillim at the end, they mumble the words while they're running out, and that's the extent of their sort of association and feeling for it. Is there an insight you can give to suggest how we can emotionally feel connected while being so far away?
So October 7th, as we realized, was the greatest single tragedy to the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It was a tragedy, honestly, beyond comprehension. Nobody in the world would have ever believed on Hoshana Rabbah of that year, of Tafshin Pei Daled, that by the time after, or maybe a day after, but Simchas Torah that year, there would be 1,200 Jews murdered, many of them babies, women, unarmed civilians, Holocaust survivors. So number one is the recognition of the event. Everything that's worthwhile in life requires work. That's just how it is. The idea of no pain, no gain, I think, is the Fum Tzara Agra, essential to Judaism. No one ever said being a good Jew is going to be easy. And it requires effort. Obviously, we were all horrified when we first heard the news. But nevertheless, it requires effort to try to feel a person's pain. I want to say full disclosure and transparency that I guess it's more closer to home by me, is that my son Tuvia, who lives in Israel, he has been serving in the army for over 300 days since October 7th. He's married, can her with 3 children. And besides the fact that I'm extremely proud of him and he hasn't missed a day of learning the daf. And I want to give a big shout out to Rabbi Stepansky and who's running his Merkaz Daf Yomi. So I agree, obviously it's very personal on my end for myself. And besides that, my father was born in Israel, born in Yerushalayim, which was in Palestine. And I have a great deal of, it's an old Yerushalmi family, actually. So I have thousands of relatives there, but even other relatives, I've had relatives who have been killed in the fighting, not in the massacre of October 7th, but since then. The cousin who perished in Lebanon, actually right by Yom Kippur of this past year. But even without, you don't have to be that connected. I don't know. I think a person, it requires a little his bonus, as they say, meaning of focusing and thinking about went on, which does require, there are a lot of books, from good books, which have been written on that, which a person should make it their business to read them. It's interesting. I remember when I used to be teaching in Beis Yaakov's, this goes to 19, probably, I don't know, maybe 2000, 2001. I don't remember exactly when it was, but when the Novaman Scribi took over the Aguda, one of the educational programs that he pushed forth was that there should be studies of the Holocaust, or I was termed there, Churban Europa, into the Beis Yaakovs and the yeshivas, and they designed the whole syllabus. And now, since then, all the Beis Yaakovs and some yeshivas as well are more secular, whatever, Jewish history, have studies of the Holocaust. Why? Well, part of the reasons I think he felt that people weren't appreciation of the godel of the Churban, the sensitivity. So you have to find out what happened, and it requires work. Nobody in any shul, if the guy sitting next to them, his wife was the one they're saying for is having open heart surgery at that moment. That was the guy who sits next to him in shul. Whether he knows him or he doesn't know him, but he knows that guy. He would never mumble and run out, just for the sake of feeling connected to that guy. So there's a recognition of I have to exercise my Kol Yisrael Raven Zelazeh muscle and recognize there are people who I can connect to. I mean, there are people you can connect to. You can even see live interviews with some of these people, even secular publications. The New York Times published an article about, I think a man Sharabi, I'm not sure if I have the name, who was a hostage, who he basically starts now putting on tefillin every day. And he describes the losses in this when you read about these people in their real life and you can relate to them. So it requires work. I'm not denying that now, as we approach 22 months almost since October 7th, 2023, I'm not denying the fact that it's a struggle to maintain our focus. Of course it is. Of course it is. And I don't, God forbid, in any way cast accusations, chas v'shalom, kitrug, on any people who sometimes have to leave or there's press. I don't. But I do think we all can spend time of recognizing what happened. There are people who are alive in our time who are people that theoretically we could have known. I mean, unfortunately, every Jew is precious. There were many, many Orthodox, we call them a little off the derech or struggling or whatever we want to call them. There were plenty of Orthodox families from the prime neighborhoods of Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, Bnei Brak, who were lost in the Nova Festival. I mean, I personally know testimony of people who decided not to go. The person is a woman here in my shul whose daughter, she showed me the screenshots of her daughter considering very strongly if she should go to the Nova event. With a man was asking her to go with her, and at the end she declined because of Shabbos. And he, unfortunately, he lost his life. He lost his life. Obviously, many people in that. I think that was the single most place where the massacre occurred. So it is a necessity that a person should focus on that when they say Tehillim. From my understanding, I didn't see it eyewitness, but a student, a Talmud of the Patterson Yeshiva Gedolu by Rabbi Chaim Sverdlov, who we know is one of the real prominent Rosh Yeshivas in the world today, certainly in North America. From my understanding is that Rabbi Chaim Sverdlov himself says the Tehillim, 3 kapitlach after davening, very slow, every day. He himself does it. So when you have the Rosh Yeshiva getting up there and saying the Tehillim, and you recognize him and saying in Patterson, New Jersey, saying Tehillim for Jews in Eretz Yisrael, and it's your rabbi, hopefully that should move you. So that's something you can, once you even know that, you can focus on that in your own. But besides that, things at home perhaps should be different. Things at home. I know a person very close to me who doesn't like to have their deeds publicized, but who stopped taking milk in their coffee since October 7th, and they still don't. Now, that may be a small gesture, but it's some reckoning, some remembrance. All in our lives, shouldn't we think twice about, like you have to, like the Navi Yirmiyahu says, after the Korban in the Banu Batim, not too kramim, you have to build your house, you have to plant, you have to eat. But even when you go out to eat, perhaps don't have dessert that time at the restaurant, besides the caloric intake, which may not be necessitated. But perhaps there should be some sort of, and talk to our preachers, some sort of recognition of Imo Anochi B'tzar. I'm with you, B'tzar. So it's a matter of paying attention. It's a matter of focus. It's a matter, but unfortunately, that tragedy is Tzarasil L'fanai Tamid. That tzara, I think, is just last week. Again, every soldier is precious. You had 4 or 5 soldiers from Netzach Yehuda. They're all Orthodox young men, all Torah mitzvahs men. Every Jew is precious. But somebody closer to us brings it home. One was from Beit Shemesh. One who was killed, Noel, the 86-year-old father of the Lubavitch family. I mean, it was people from Beit Shemesh, but I have 2 sons live in Beit Shemesh. I mean, they went to the funeral. They knew the family. So these people, it's not like we're not even talking about an event of the Holocaust. We're dealing with something that the survivors and the people, the victims are alive and with us. And by accessing their stories, we remember Rabbi Rucham Levovitz in the Das Torah is clear. And this idea, please don't believe me. Everybody go to the Das Torah, look up in the index, Dosei Bolim Chavero, read the Maimarim yourself. Go through them yourself. If you're not able to do it, find someone who will learn it with you. But he writes that the idea of when you're mavakir chol and no talachad mashishim mechol, you take 1/60th. He says that that's to be understood literally. Anytime you feel the pain of the Jewish people, meaning when there's a gzar din, when there's some sort of decree on the Jewish people, so by pure feeling the pain, you actually, as he writes, Gov says Dino, meaning the decree, it was paid, the bill was paid. If you you need to pay your PSC&G, your electric bill, you don't have the money, the extra money doesn't care if I write the $100 or $1,000 check, as long as they get their money. So to speak, Rabbi Yerucham, write this, please I don't want you to take my word, I want you to read it yourself. Time and time again to learn these mamarim. He says that a person who feels the pain of another person, he actually helps he's decreasing, he's minimizing, he's decreasing, he's paying back the debt which, quote unquote, the Gzar Din is demanding. So a person who realizes that feeling the pain, besides that it's mahu orechu mafatarachum, chol tzarasum lo tzar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu feels our pain, the Navi Yeshaya tells us. And we know that, we have, I'm with you in the pain. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for it's being a HaKadosh Baruch Hu like. We started our discussion of, feeling the 3 weeks and feeling the Churban, how do you feel like Mashiach, or Hashem's presence, or whatever. I mean, feeling, we can't be Hashem, but we can act like Hashem. Hashem is no body. Hashem is not sensory perceivable. By definition, the Rambam writes, that's one of the necessity of being a Chodesh Baruch Hu, is that you're not perceivable in a sensory manner. But when we act like Hashem, then we become. When we act godly, we become as close to Hashem. Halachta. You go in His ways. Hashem feels our pain. Hashem is merciful. We hope He's empathetic. We know He's empathetic. That's empathy. And if Hashem does it, that means it's a good thing. And a good thing means it's better for us and better for Klal Yisrael. And not only that, it's mandated to be like that. We're mandated to be like Hashem. So the most Jewish thing you can do is to feel, you don't need me, all the great Bali Musa say that the person, Hashem is suffering more than we are. Hashem suffers more than we are when, unfortunately, this decree happens. That was the whole idea of Tzadik Viralo. It's the Odyssey, it's not for now. But we know Hashem feels our pain. The Gemara tells us, Kivyachol, right? The Gemara tells us in Sota that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the brick, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kivyachol, had a brick under his feet, and all the Sheba, that he should feel the pain. Hashem heard their scream. Hashem hears our pain. So it's hard. A lot of things in life is hard. A lot of things in life is hard. But doesn't mean that it's not to be that a person should. It doesn't mean it's hate. It doesn't mean that a person is but you're not a bein chorim. You're not free to exempt yourself from it. But here, I think, to be honest with you, it's a person who doesn't. Unfortunately, here I think it's that much more in front of us. So I realize it's hard. It's 20 months. I realize we're living in America. We're not on the front lines. I realize all that. But I think, isn't that what, just say we had Rabbi Pesach Krohn speak here in the shul Sunday. So when I introduced him in Shavas Haratamas, the first thing I said was that Rabbi Krohn, when he had a stroke, 7-8 months ago, I remember when he had a stroke, and maybe more. And when I spoke to him after the stroke, he's a man 80 years old. The first thing he told me was, how's Tuvia Nissen ben Yehudis? How's my son Tuvia Nissen? He knew his name. I davened for him every day. Wow. He just had a stroke, and that's the first thing he tells me. Obviously, he worked on himself to feel the pain of others. I know we live in a world where I'm part of that. I'm part of probably the problem. Where the biggest concern is what's for dinner. What are we eating for dinner? Where are we eating dinner? If we would think for a second, maybe just for a second, what's the hostages, the 20 hostages in Gaza? What's the families who lost family members? What are they eating for dinner? How do they feel about dinner? So first and foremost, it's what Hashem wants us to do. And I don't want to be selfish, but it's going to be beneficial to us. Because the greater you act like Hashem, the closer you get to Hashem. That's halachta b'dracha. There's almost like nothing like it. Nothing like it. Plus, it's unbelievably beneficial to Klal Yisrael. So it's something I think we have to focus on very, very, and we should never, ever fall into the horrific pitfall of regilus, of that it becomes just life, everything, that's the Gemara there in Tainus. The Gemara says, everyone left, I'm going to go home, and eat my food. The Gemara there in Yud Aleph, I'm going to go home, I'm going to eat whatever I want to eat, I'm going to eat, echol v'shtei, and v'shalom alai nafshi, and everything will be fine for me. The Gemara said that person, it's horrific. Mi meid alav, nishmaso shalada meid alav. His own neshama testifies that you did wrong, that you didn't feel the pain. And the Yitzhar Adami Matzibur, the Gemara, famous Gemara, the Gemara says, Moshe lo haya lo kar v'keses, there was no pillow, there was no cushion. No, he says, Klal Yisrael is in the middle, Milchama, I'm going to go ahead and sit in comfort. This is literally the bread and butter, the olive base of what Yiddishkeit is about. To feel the pain. So that's, I think, a very critical thing. It's very critical for us. And I imagine the other way, when we don't do that, it's very detrimental to us as individuals and as a Klal Yisrael, as a community. So it's something, hopefully, I try to work on myself. I try to do it the best I can to work on with the Kehillah. But I think we have to fight against very strongly, very passionately, Again, it's just having this, that's just, well, everything is fine now, or life has returned to normal. It hasn't. And that's something I think we should keep, front and center on the front burner constantly.
What closing chizuk can you give to the many thousands of people watching this to stay on fire in 2025 as a Yid?
I think two things, which are both opposite ends of the spectrum. Number one is to stay on fire, is to look around at what's going on in the world around us, not in our little bubbles of Lakewood, Borough Park, Passaic, Muncie, wherever they happen to be. But to recognize the fact, what's going on in Israel now is scary. First of all, not leaving out, but putting for a moment on the side for just a moment, the external threats of the war within Gaza with Hamas, with soldiers still being killed. There's still threats that are going on from Iran and Lebanon. Who knows what will happen? But certainly there's no peace treaty. And in Yehuda and Shomron, in the quote-unquote the occupied territories, what's going on. But internally in Israel, the country is very divided. I'm not such a fan of these. It never was like this. And I don't know how can anyone say it never was like this. They can only know what they're in. But maybe an older person, even that, how much of their memories remember how their feelings were. But certainly we're living in a time when there's a huge, huge schism in the Jewish people. Now, you mentioned before Sinas Chinum. There's a lot of sinna. There's a lot of hatred being thrown in all directions. A lot of hatred. And a person recognized that, and even within our communities, questions of person should vote in certain elections, not vote in certain elections. It's good, it's bad, it's terrible, it's right, it's the best thing, it's the worst thing. It also became, unfortunately, very, very big divisions within our Frum community. And within our country, it's no secret, we all saw how much you allowed yourself to see, but we all saw the reaction of probably millions of people in our country who actually validated in the most strangest way that that Israel was the aggressor and is the aggressor, which basically we all know it spread itself to anti-Semitism has reached levels in this country, which has led to death, both in the left and the right. People say there are mass shootings. I believe the only mass shooting directed at religious institutions were shuls. I don't believe there are any mass shootings in our country, thankfully. I don't think there should be. I think the only place of worship in this country that wherever you go, sometimes I'm a guest speaker, I'm a scholar in residence and all over the country, Denver, California, Florida, Memphis. Wherever I go, there's one common feature in all the shuls. They all have armed guards. The mosque doesn't have an armed guard. Doesn't even have necessarily a combination line. No churches. You can walk on Fifth Avenue, New York. You walk by St. Patrick's Cathedral. The door is open, wide open. That's their whole point. The door is open. The door is open onto Fifth Avenue in New York City, open. Try getting into a shul, try a few doors down even. I'm not saying you should. It's a Reformed temple, but you go to Temple Emmanuel, it's just a few blocks down from St. Patrick's. There, try to get in. You have to go through a metal detector. You're back at TSA. You're back at the JFK airport to go in. Recognize that. Recognize how much Jewish money is being poured into these groups to be poured into armed guards. We're the only group. So all these factors, I think, that should give a person to remove their bubble, not to just stop in wherever the local eatery is and what bagel place has the best bagel and what hamburger place makes the best hamburger, the best pizza in town, the best pie. To recognize the world around them. And there's big problems. I think that can give a person a recognition or put them on hopefully a flame to recognize that what's going on in the world is scary. It is scary. Two, there's no doubt, unfortunately we know it now, that part of why Hamas decided to perpetrate that horrific massacre was because of the infighting going on and the divisions in Israel at the time, which certainly were a distraction to the security forces. Number two, I think can also give a person chizik, is hakaras hatov, which is frankly the other side of the coin, but equally as justified in this balance. I mean, on one hand, I don't want to say we're living in the worst times ever, God forbid, but I do want to say we're living in probably more challenging time to be a Jew than in a lot of other times, certainly in this country. On the other hand, we're also the beneficiaries of unprecedented bracha. Unprecedented bracha. I mean, there's probably never in Jewish history been a place like Lakewood, New Jersey. Not necessarily in the amount of Jews, which is certainly King Yerbu, amazing. But amazing, I have a daughter who lives in Lakewood, New Jersey. When I go visit, I'm amazed that literally for miles and miles and miles, besides it's an Orthodox neighborhood, you can go to Brooklyn, also a beautiful Orthodox neighborhood. But the amount of land, the institutions being built, almost every yeshiva, every Beis Yaakov, every school, every Mossad, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Hasidish. I mean, but one building is gigantic more than the other, with plenty of spaces for parking. Halls, new wedding halls seem to be opened up, huge wedding halls, beautiful, places with, they're not, the Royale anymore on McDonald Avenue in Brooklyn, a huge, beautiful place. Some buildings have two in there located. I'm saying there's a huge bracha as far as, and Eretz Yisrael as well, there's a huge bracha that Hashem allowed us to live in a time where, notwithstanding what I said before about rising anti-Semitism, we're also living in the times of Jews never had it so good in the diaspora here in America. I mean, for the most part, to be honest, even though I said there's a rise in anti-Semitism, simultaneously, we live in also the safest times. You go to any hospital in the New York area, you're almost sure you'll see a person with a yarmulke on. You go almost anywhere in New York City, and you're sure to meet someone with a yarmulke or someone with another yid or another. And thankfully, for the most part, we were allowed unfettered access to the benefits of this country. Those who seek higher education, there are challenges there, but still there are many, many, many Orthodox Jews, Torah Jews, that are having access even politically. One looks at Rockland County; they've just elected Hasidic people to represent them in local and state governments, which were unprecedented. People in full of Hasidic levush now occupy political voted in seats. So there's certainly a lot of bracha in this country as well. Hakaras hatov should put a person on fire. When I realized what Hashem gave me, the beneficiary, to be very honest, whoever thought of an Orthodox rabbi, making a podcast and putting it on, accessible. It's also a bracha HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. So I know there are two ends of the knife, but, that we have this idea that on one hand, the challenges should hopefully push us to be that much more conscious and empathetic and more vigorous in that way. Simultaneously, the recognition of the bracha, our recognition of Hashem's benevolence, of Hashem's, we're the beneficiaries of the greatest benefactor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what He's given us in this door, should also hopefully, if somebody gives you an unbelievable gift, it deserves a full-throated and wholehearted thank you. So I think, even though that they're somewhat, I don't think they're not mutually exclusive, and then they both can bring to an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to connect with Him. He wants us to reach out. He wants us to be at shalom with each other. He wants us to improve. Hopefully, if we keep those in mind, we'll move away and we won't fall into the pitfall of hergelus, doing things just habitually, which unfortunately, mitzvahs, anoshim melumda, some sort of habitual performance of mitzvahs, which obviously is very negative.
My husband, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Reb Hill, very much. I do appreciate it.